Bronze Age Mindset contains of 4 chapters and a prologue. You are now listening to the first chapter. Click in the right above corner to listen to the full audiobook. Part 1. The Flame of Life. 1. What if you've been misled about what is life? They do this by showing you 2 red marionette and shake them in front, then you stay mesmerized and clap like trained seal. Is like in politics before last year. You had in years before Trump, the fat bald gluttons of the right, put in a fighting ring against the Janet Renos, the woman with pickup trucks, the thin-lipped transnamales of the left. You had good people mesmerized even by this show, and it's funny to see a fat bald man try to tear out the eyes of women of strong forearm with mullet, both frothing at mouth. Both saying nothing, but grunts of pigs and pre-made platitude, formula. But meanwhile the nation suffered and the future of youth was given away. When they trick you about what is life, this even worse, because you don't see problem right away. But then comes out 60 years later, and your grandchildren don't exist, or they are 56% humanoid shifting about between shadows, or they are of noble power, but have to hide under half-finished buildings because are hunted. But you must understand both left and right have been fooled about what is life. 2. Group of horses in broad plain, and the led stallion is captured by a wild spirit, starts to gallop this way and that, and the whole herd follows in a great rush of power and freedom. Nietzsche talks about this. I've seen many things like this myself, was at big waterfall, gathering place of many birds and other animal. Through all the cycles of history this place remains and birds who witnessed the coming and going of human civilizations remember it through the eons and always return there. I saw many group of small birds, when the weather slightly changed, this waterfall so big that a small wind would make spray of water everywhere. Sun came from behind clouds and spread many small rainbows, birds would become excited, come out from crevices in rock face, and would glory in the sprays of water and the rainbows, they swoon doing acrobatics this way and that. Like when Homer says that on some Asian meadow tribes of geese and crane and long-necked swans glory in the power of their wings above it, then land between the rivers, in Scamandrian plain, with a great clang. Is not enough just to say, what is purpose of this to survival or reproduction? Surely some pedant can make a story. But when you see this behavior, as not so alien. Maybe, in happiest moments you were free to act and feel the same. What anything to do with survival or reproduction? That kind of heavy necessity is the spirit of gravity, and this is opposite. That petty and cramped view of life, but in truth, life as it is, when free, life in abundance knows luxury, surfeit and waste. Survival and reproduction are side effects of something else. 3. The most noble animals refuse to breed in captivity. Many animal, not just man, choose death when trapped. But I thought all life strove for mere survival and reproduction. But this not enough. But if not enough then must understand animal in some other way. Very much when thinkers talk about evolutionary psychology they abstract from way of yeast to way of animals and man, but this is backward. 4. There's a sociology of the world of scientists like of everything else. This is a cause of much confusion about biology and ideas of evolution. You think you've been given objective truth, but the minds of biologists are in general very limited. The truth is the biggest minds always went for physics among the sciences, then maybe chemistry. Until recently but even now biology gives little opportunity for the kind of thinking that penetrates mystery of nature, the kind of insight into physical relations that attracts the best scientific minds. They've been on the whole a half and half group in history. Schopenhauer refers with contempt to the people who have their catalogues of monkeys and think they understand nature. Darwin himself, Nietzsche called him a petty mind, the kind of calculator who likes to collect many small facts and synthesize some clumsy theory. The theory is clumsy and full of holes. This is the biggest reason creationists, who are also wrong, have been able to challenge it, where they were never able to challenge theoretical physics. There is much dishonesty and stupidity among scientists and biologists when they talk about evolution and life. 5. The problem now is you think I want to attack idea of evolution or to change it because it's racist or uncomfortable, just like the left and others attack or suppress it. This is not true. Listen. You don't need Darwin to believe in heredity and even evolution. People knew about heredity and the different lineages of man long before Darwin. In the political sense, the promotion of Darwin teaching and its application to mankind is a great good. The left and its many robots. I will talk of their origin later. They want nothing more than to hide truth about human nature. And Darwin, evolutionary science in all its forms, is a great weapon of truth against them. In all this I agree, but remember the marionettes I mentioned. Don't be distracted by the puppet play. It is important not to be misled by a fierce debate with a stupid opponent into just accepting the only other alternative that is presented to you. Although the left, or what I have termed the bug man, hates and fears evolutionary ideas applied to humans, Darwinism itself is the product of bug thought. In the end it won't show you way out of the prison of the ages. The hereditary nature of the qualities and the suitability of an organism to its environment and vice versa, all of this is true observation. And that true observation about heredity is in the end enough. You don't need more than that to utterly crush all the designs and vanities of the bug man. The bugman fears heredity and nature, not Darwin. 6. You must understand that the evolutionary psychologist, the evo-biologist, the Darwinist in general, most such people are very good and even great minds who are just misled by the fight. They play a game of bait and switch. Many times he's not aware he does this himself. He believes in Darwinism as a teleological faith, that reproduction and survival are the ends of life, the purpose toward which all life strives, and that this explains how life or an organism behaves, and also how it is adapted to its environment. But when you confront him on this, he will deny all notion of teleology. He will say he doesn't believe in any of this, but only in a material mechanism of natural selection. Through this mechanism those organisms that are not in keeping with demands of environment at some time are slowly paired out. By a process analogous to our breeding of animals like dog and horse, nature itself breeds organisms and life this way and that, by accident. There is no end or purpose, he will say, you are crazy. But then when he's not paying attention he will talk a different way. They all do this. He will start to say that this or that animal is behaving this or that way because it is trying to secure either reproduction or survival. He will explain physical features in this way too, and when he really forgets himself he will make a moral principle out of it. The most honest ones, when they trust you, will talk about replicating themselves as an aspiration and a goal. This is human, all too human, but also very natural, because it's very hard to talk about biology or life without teleology or some consideration of ends or purpose. Clearly physics and chemistry seem to be driven by no purpose or goal. But animals seem very much driven by motive or purpose, and it's hard to explain a biological feature without reference to its end or purpose. So the Darwinist forgets, or tries to change the topic all the time. He knows what is really interesting is the question of what drives life, what explains animal behavior, and what explains the correspondence between organism and environment. This is the question. The mechanism of heredity or the means by which a species is shaped, natural or unnatural selection, which is really Darwin's only insight, is the least interesting part of all. Actually it is a tautology, yes, only those animals who have managed to reproduce actually pass on their traits. Something every sheep breeder in history has known. But that this alone explains animal adaptation or behavior is nonsense. 7. There is alpine mouse that collects food for winter. Somehow it knows exactly the proportion of poison herbs to include in winter stores to preserve them. Too much and the food it gathered becomes poison, too little and it spoils. There is example Schopenhauer gives. 2 insects and one will kill the other on sight. Yet this other presents no immediate danger to the first, but will only eat its eggs in the future. How does that first insect know this? It is not taught, nor does it see. It has very primitive nervous system. It knows this somehow in the blood. This is a very specific and complicated behavior. There are many such cases in nature. Creationists have focused too much on complicated physical features, but even for something like the eye or the bacterial flagellum, it is possible to construct stories of how they evolved gradually. I don't believe those stories, they sound improbable and made up, but they're more believable than the stories you have to make up in the case of behaviors. And many more. So many animals and simple insects have such complicated behaviors they are born with already. At some point the incremental explanation becomes so convoluted it is hard to believe. Please remember that Aristotelian Ptolemaic system for calculating motion of planets and so on worked quite well for a long time. It was abandoned because ever more convoluted explanations had to be invented to support the fundamental and wrong assumption of geocentric model. Evolutionary theory today is slowly in same position and nowhere more than where they may try to explain inborn behaviors of this kind. It is obvious that such behaviors, if you want to call them adaptations, came about as we see them now, complete and without significant incremental change. How did such miracle occur? This is not creationist book. I do not believe in that. Nor do I believe in the miracle that modern science has invented, hiding under the word random mutation and the hand-waving of incremental change. There is no time, nor enough number of specimens, nor the kinds of mutations observed to support either natural selection or Lamarckianism as explanations for evolution. Many of the mathematical models for how a trait will spread in a population have failed. They don't tell you this. No, I don't talk about miracles, whatever words you put them under. And the design is there, but it is by no means benevolent or intelligent, nor comprehensible. You see in the spider's web a creature of rudimentary nervous system and little intelligence design something beautiful and complex, and this is key to understanding also all of nature. There is an inherent intelligence inside things, uncanny, silent and demonic. Its workings and aims are obscure to us. Our own intelligence is only a crude deviation of it, an approximation. There is an intelligence in all things, and inborn in our bodies before anything to do with the brain or the nervous system. And all adaptations, no matter how much natural or unnatural selection may have gone to spreading them within a population, occur not by random, but by a spontaneous correspondence of some kind between the organism and the environment. Someday we may discover the material cause or manifestation of this correspondence, or the chain by which it travels from the rock face and the elements of brute matter up the forms of life. There is some as yet undiscovered signaling system. But the adaptation by no means takes place at random, nor even primarily by natural selection, which is just one of the means by which it spreads in a population. 8. A truly objective or scientific approach to life would be to start without assumptions. Make no big stories. Take animal and study. Study what it does in nature, not lab, when left alone from human. Study different specimens, the mood, the behavior at different time of year, in different places, at different levels of fortune and well-being. Make no assumption about what it wants ultimately, study how it behaved today, tomorrow, in the moment, which is only thing that exists for animal. Look inside its brain. Study its hormones and its internal states with great care and, with clinical objective eye, correlate these internal states to what it does or what it's driving at and driving at that day or in that moment, not what you think about reproduction or survival. This is true path to understand animal, adaptation, behavior and life. There is some of this done, but much too little, and not well. In the end, are you so different from goat, dog or even ant that you look at such beings and really remain puzzled? For sure the real research I just named must be done, if only to convince the boneheads. But the behavior of an animal would be a complete mystery to you if you weren't very similar yourself. But we understand right away a bear angry at bees, or playing under white silver birch in thick of forest, or lizard frightened and winding between rocks, why it does what it does. It is no mystery to us, who are also like them. We love dogs because they express so honestly and without dissimulation what we also are and want. They and other pets calm us because promote a kind of carelessness normal to animal life, unencumbered by thoughts of the past or worries about the future, none of which actually exist. Women are, in their natural state, close to this condition as well, or closer on the whole, which is where they get much of their charm and power from. The modern education, that teaches women to be hyper-aware, anxious for the future, abstract neurotics, etc., actually takes away their power to a great degree, while tricking them into thinking they are being tough or sassy. But a hyper-conscious woman is made powerless and charmless. But study must be made of inner state of animal, now in this condition, now that. What anyway would objective study of an organism say? What does life want? 9. Darwin and his style of thinking would never have made so much impression or ever had such power if it were simply false. Actually, Darwinism is true, but only under certain conditions. It's not even a half-truth, it's actually the full truth about a kind of life, but the mistake is to think it describes all life. Darwin is meaningless without Malthus, but this is why Nietzsche is right about both of them when he says they describe only life in England, or more precisely the England of that time. The beginning of the industrial age, and England as the first nation that solved the problem of infant mortality. These are the relevant facts. England was able to colonize so much of the New World because it was the first country to solve this problem. Many criticize in some way the Spanish or Portuguese model of colonization, but you must know the Portuguese had a population of 1 million when they began the age of discovery with Henry the Navigator. And of that population, many fewer were young men who could embark on voyages of great danger, some say up to a fourth or more died on these voyages alone. They had no manpower to settle faraway lands, but continued the old pattern of elite dominance, where brotherhoods of conquering men often took local wives and such. By contrast, the English could now transplant entire populations, being surfeit of humans. But it was still not enough. The cities became crowded, the filth unbearable as the lowest classes swarmed the monstrous new machines of industry. The living conditions of workers well into the 20th century were purely hellish. Marx and his followers, at least, were right about that, and that's why they could prey on this condition. It was a condition of misery and destitution similar to or worse than we see in the shantytowns of the Third World. Solution to infant mortality problem meant these lower classes put all excess income into supporting more mouths to feed, not improving the quality of life of the children they had. Just an exponential increase in human biomass. And this is the world of Malthus and of Darwin, life under filth, life under distress. Darwinism describes life under extreme stress. From this very partial view he thinks he has discovered the truth about life in general, but animal under conditions of extreme stress, crowded condition, observed and watched, filthy, beaten and imprisoned, its life severely regimented away from what it would like to do if left to its devices, will not give you secret to what life is. It will be very misleading example, and this is basis of Darwinism and of all thought that comes from it. It is the philosophy of life of the tenement and the slum, of the open-air work camp. 10. No kind of distress is worse than the feeling you are trapped. My worst nightmares are about opening a door, only to find myself in the same aluminum cell, over and over. The exhaustion that sets in after a long night of chess, when you sleep and your mind dreams repeat nonsense moves, I know of few worse forms of torment. And this is self-imposed, through exhaustion, but even worse is when an outside force, or being restrains you, yet you are in full control of your spirits and power, at least to begin with. That condition is intolerable for the most noble animals, who choose death if necessary, or at least any way to escape, no matter how painful. Many Caribs, trapped into slavery, died because they couldn't endure this, some bit through their arms to escape their chains, and endured any pain to escape captivity. Germanic mothers would kill infants when Roman legions closed in. Tacitus described life of Germanic warrior who lived his whole life dedicated to war and fame, never became a domestic. At Masada and at other times the Jews killed their own children to escape subjection when they were still a noble people. Xenophon describes in Anabasis how mother with infant would jump off a cliff in the highlands of Urartu to escape the advance of the Greek army. We see same videos in Japan and Okinawa, mother jump off cliff. Buddhist monks Vietnam self-immolated and brought great shame on the West. For this reason Nietzsche say, noble peoples do not endure slavery, they're either free or they die out. There is no adaptation to slavery for some types of life. What is that people who has chosen survival at any price? The price they paid was monstrous and such a people becomes monstrous and distorted if it accepts this. The distinction between master races and the rest is simple and true, Hegel said it, copying Heraclitus, those peoples who choose death rather than slavery or submission in a confrontation, that is a people of masters. There are many such in the world, not only among the Aryans, but also the Comanche, many of the Polynesians, the Japanese and many others. But animal of this kind refuses entrapment and subjection. It is very sad to witness those times when such animal can neither escape nor kill itself. I saw once a jaguar in zoo, behind a glass, so that all the bugs in human form could gawk at it and humiliate it. This animal felt a noble and persistent sadness, being observed everywhere by the obsequious monkeys, not even monkeys, that were taunting it with stares. He could tell, I saw this. He could tell he was living in a simulated environment and that he had no power to move or live. His sadness crushed me, and I will always remember this animal. I never want to see life in this condition. 11. Just a few weeks ago I was outside nightclub in city that is still untouched by first world regimented hygiene, well lighted, clean streets made safe for women come at a high price for the mood of a city. In this place the government and bureaucracy couldn't extend its rules and cleanup efforts, even if it wanted. There are then many nooks and hidden corners that are under no one's control. In this no man's land there is mafia, so many perverts, there is some crime, but it's kept at mostly very low or non-violent level because place is full of off-duty cops on the make and no doubt spooks foreign and domestic and who knows what else. I find life without such refuge to be almost intolerable, so here I felt free, but I think, was after day in a haze, and the glycine was kicking in. I must have taken 600 milligrams theanine as well, and after much coffee I was spacing out. Under vicious neon yellow lights I stood looking at the bouncer almost in a trance. I wondered what it was like to be him. He was alert, knew what posturetto take for his job, and what look in the eye to emulate. Or put on an act of being vigilant, and was imposing in broad frame under leather jacket with military-type epaulets, but there was a kindness or softness in his eyes. Maybe would have taken some power of perception to see this, and I doubt he was challenged often by the customer riffraff because of it, but I could see it, how at times he sunk into a sadness and boredom looking in the distance. I too looked down the long broad street, mostly empty except for some small groups of drunks, hookers, some revelers, in the distance there was great fountain and plaza lighted up on all sides. I don't know why, maybe the calmness of the blessed aminos hit me but my gaze veered off to one of the apartment buildings on the side of the road. There was just one light turned on in the middle of building, and my mind wandered to who lived there, and what they were like, and then to how it would be if I was the boy or girl who lived there. Many times I've wished, not so much, that I was someone else, nor that I was immortal, but that I could live many different lives simultaneously, and not be limited to being only one thing. At such moments of mood where you're both calm, and at least feel free every detail of life becomes interesting, all takes the character of images from a peaceful dream that present themselves in turn, and don't move you one way or another, because you see through them. I wonder then at least as a zoological experiment, what it would be like to be a Vietnamese girl, a nail shop owner, or even an obese Angolan middle-aged woman running a pedicure operation with pink walls. Yes, no form of human life is beneath me at such moments. I've even had dreams that I was a door of vase, free to observe. I imagine only the seeing, the satisfaction of curiosity, and not the thousands of cares that must affect these people who I want to inhabit. But most of all then, when to this love of curiosity is added some sudden burst of energy, I start to wonder about men like myself of around my age, and what it would be like to be them, what they think moment to moment, what pulls them this way and that. I feel then a great longing for them, and also for myself, and think of the friendships that I could have had with them, and the great tasks that could await. I feel beset by this as an almost erotic irritation that is diffuse, and a great sadness and irritation that I will never know who lived in that building at that window, never see what they saw looking out. These ways, this is all my version of love for mankind. Of the other abstract kind, it means nothing and those who invoke it are bullshitters. 12. Very young rams, very young stag even when fawn, well before horns appear, play fight with heads budding. This is in anticipation of horns that will grow. Yet no one teaches them this, but they know it in the blood. What came first for this animal, the development of horns or the knowledge and will to fight in this manner? In phenomenon like this is kept the secret and truth about evolution and life. 13. Struggle for space. A healthy animal not under distress, not maimed, not trapped by man, seeks first when young. Space. Animals seek space in physical sense, territory. But this meaning isn't crudely physical. I give this as vivid image which is true for many animals that seek ownership of concrete territory. But more generally you must take it to mean something else, space to develop inborn powers. Monkey that lives in trees seeks skills to master canopy, beaver seeks ownership of river and banks and reeds in its grasp, many big cat of course seek mastership of actual territory and claims to prey and mates in this territory. Big feline hunting dogs seek full use of claws, fangs, development of smell and other senses to extend their reach over space. They seek these things because they want to master matter. All of this is higher organism organizing itself to master matter in surrounding space. Successful mastery of this matter leads to development of inborn powers and flourishing of organism, which allows it to master more matter, to marshal the lower to feed the higher. It is mobilization of matter to develop the inborn character or idea or fate. This true not only for food literally. In social animals an analogous process takes place within social relations or social space. There are some important changes that happen here, but principle is same. Important to understand that there is a circular process. Organism seeks mastery of space, environment, to master matter in ways particular to its own abilities, and as a result of this mastery of matter, there is development of its body, its senses, and all of its faculties, and the unfolding of its inborn destined form or nature, in time, its particular form flowering in the spring of its season. All of this requires precisely freedom from struggle for survival, or time away from this, a reprieve from this pressure. As for reproduction, animal in natural state will not even seek at this point, will not even think it. Very far from its aims. It seeks to become strong, skillful, to master problems and feel the expansion of its powers, and not just feel them, but perceive it to be truly so, perceive intuitively its mastery over its space. Only after full development of its powers and its mastery over space specific to its needs does the need or desire for reproduction come. Reproduction is side effect of animal desire for discharge of strength after mastery over space is achieved. For this reason many lower animal breed very fast and in great hurry, but the higher and more organized the form of life, the more complex its needs for development are, the longer is delayed the time of reproduction, and the more vulnerable it is to the stresses of competition for survival. Animals that have evolved under intense competition are in some sense stunted, less beautiful, less intelligent, less magnificent. There are many factions in nature and many paths that pull in opposite directions. You must learn to see the secret language of nature and what it drives at. There is one path that drives for the production of a supreme specimen. It is the path that governs higher life. Survival and reproduction are only side effects of this path. Life is at most basic, struggle for ownership of space. 14. Some things make my blood boil far more than a direct physical challenge might. I once left the gym, and some Chad came up to me and started to feel me up. Then I discovered he was feeling up my pockets, was trying to see if someone stole his missing stuff. I found this very amusing. Maybe was post-workout and I was very calm, but was not offended by this, partly his manner was not obtrusive despite what he was doing. It was possibly a form of muscle worship. But rarely do I feel angrier as a violation of my privacy than if I eat in restaurant alone and someone comes to sit right next to me when the whole place is empty. Vilest of all is when a group of something, I think were subcons or Han, came and sat just by me in an entirely empty restaurant and started to eat with mouths open. That sound too, fewer things grate on the nerves and present themselves as imposition on your space than the sound of so-called human eating. Other animals making sound eating don't bother me, but I find charming. Different types even within same grouping of animals, I refuse the word species, have very different needs of life. My blood starts to boil against my kindness and judgment even when I stay with Grill and she insists on setting air conditioner off or closing window because too cold. I like open spaces and slightly cool, and there can be no living together with creatures who like a huddled and overwarm existence. I believe also the white race, or rather some groupings within it. There are far more races than people want to admit, is in general hostile to the way of life of the tribes that like a close-packed existence. These are biological requirements of this or that way of life, and no laws, no common beliefs, can bring such different types together. A hybrid of such types would probably be born and remain physiologically confused or sick. 15. Hormones. Energy and higher life the same. If we had very advanced sensors, where we could observe the inside of animals from far, and in great detail, without interfering, without them feeling irritated or oppressed by our impositions, we could learn much about what life means. From observing many different ones in different places we could see what conditions an animal seeks in life in general. Such sensors would need to be much more advanced than equipment we have now, and to show what parts of the brain are activated, to see the relationship of this to blood pressure and heart rate, the actions of the immune system, the level of various inflammatory and anti-inflammatory markers, and most of all the balance and action of the various hormones on the body's systems, on the brain, and how these correlate to what the animal is doing at any one time. Any information we have right now on this subject is at most rudimentary. The medical literature is confused, is presented with great confidence, but is corrupted by money, career, and other interests of all kinds. The scientific literature is less known, and itself remains contradictory. We know at most a few relations of what, say, elevated thyroid or cortisol means at such and such time of day, and its multiple effects on various body tissues and systems. We have no real overall understanding of how such things interact, nor what they mean for the body's overall processes, still less in the life of an organism as a whole, and the few who have attempted to achieve such understanding, like Ray Peat, are treated as cranks. But it's not possible to understand what life means, nor what an organism drives at, nor what any specific behavior or physical adaptation means until this is taken up. If biologists had been honest people they would have tried to proceed in this way, without assumptions, just amassing observations about different organisms in different situations. But they did this only very little, and it's always distorted by their various agendas and prejudices. The data we have itself is therefore at this point much too sparse, and it will take decades to get what is needed, even if researchers begin now. It will be a genius of the ages who will really be able to understand and explain the complete view of how hormones act in an organism. There is no irony here, I don't do irony. Learn that I don't understand the gay idea of irony. Hormones hold the key to the meaning of life in the most fundamental way, and if this sounds reductionist to you, If you think I demystify things too much, it's because you think you know what you don't, or you think scientists know, when they actually don't. These substances, seen with fresh eyes, are pure big magic. They govern all cycles of an organism's growth and its decay. They can turn small calf or baby gorilla into giant elephant or half-ton silverback on diet of greens. They can turn skinny man into Herculean half-god, or make strong man take on the aspect of woman, and change tendencies and feelings, mirroring the magical transformation of some animals that switch sexes by signals we don't yet understand. This doesn't even begin to cover the different meanings of thyroid, progesterone, the various neurotransmitters, and many others that act one way on the nervous system, another way on the gut, another way on the immune system, that govern cell division, and the preservation of function in ways that are for the moment a mystery to doctors and to science. Only a complete understanding of these hidden substances will reveal the fullness of life in its glory. The study of life as a black box has led to misunderstandings because the observers are dishonest and stupid and will report an action, but not what comes before or after, nor its place in the life of an animal, nor do they try to intuit from within themselves. The study of hormones, among many other internal processes of an organism, will prevent them from lying in this way. For example, an animal may act one way under stress and pressure, but then appear to do the same action out of a spirit of openness and self-increase, and the same action or behavior may actually have completely different meanings biologically. This will be shown by actions of hormones, neurotransmitters, cytokines in the body. And I will tell you what they likely to discover. So far only Ray Peat, a man blessed by a grand and alien understanding, has tried to decipher the secret language of these blessed substances. Learn that there are at least two kinds of life. Usually you think of life versus inanimate matter. How strange that the most primitive languages, the agglutinative grunts of Neanderthals like Basque, distinguish not between gender of noun, but between animate and inanimate. I wonder then what they would call yeast. Learn that there are two kinds of life, and yeast is different from higher life. Higher life means many fancy and mysterious things too, of course, but at its most basic, it has to do with differentiation and structure. Yeast is an amorphous blob that expands, whereas a higher organism has different parts with different functions, different organs, different systems within itself. The sexes are different because it reproduces sexually, and some have taken this to be the main distinction, asexual versus sexual reproduction. But it's obvious that differentiation in higher organisms goes much beyond this. And to preserve the function of the different organs and different systems within itself, an organism sacrifices the ability to expand and replicate indiscriminately, like yeast does for example. You can think of it as sacrifice of this ability, or just say that these two modes or tendencies, expansion and replication of cells on one hand, and preservation of higher, or differentiated function on the other, are at odds with each other. They are governed by different hormones and neurotransmitters, where estrogen and serotonin are stress substances that govern cell division, but thyroid and progesterone are those that govern the preservation of function. It is not correct to call estrogen then a sex hormone, but a stress hormone, and its greater proportion in body of female is because female is under greater stress due to demands of inner cell division and menstruation. The picture is far from complete of course, but this leads to many good observations. Considering this from the other side, the side of pathology, the indiscriminate cell division, the return of primitive life within the human body is called cancer, which looks and acts very much like a fungus does. Conversely, from the side of health, the structure of the body is preserved to the extent that cells successfully command energy, and so, to speak artistically, but to be right, on one side the hormones that promote cell energy are precisely those that promote the preservation of function, namely thyroid and the like, whereas the hormones that promote lassitude and that take away energy are precisely those that promote cell division, inflammation, the production of free radicals, the breakdown in order and function. At a deep level this must be connected to the fundamental truth of nature, that structure and energy must be the same, that energy is not as diffuse as we imagine it, but has an inner intelligence. This word is very bad in this case, because it is rather the imperfect intellect of our brains that is a mere approximation of this primordial and primal will. This will is almighty. Its forms are endless. It is no different from the fire of Heraclitus, a pervasive energy at play, inside all things, that seeks to order and reorder itself into ascending, uncanny objects. Its intent is mischievous and beyond our ability to understand in words. In the life of organisms, this seeks to order itself into higher and more differentiated forms, that is, concretely, seeks the production of one supreme specimen. Peoples are nature's circuitous ways to great specimens, and for this reason the peoples that have arisen out of nature must be preserved in their distinct forms. In same way, see from all this that aesthetic physique has the most cosmic significance, and it is because of what I have said so far that aesthetic bodies are a window to the other side, because they are the pinnacle of nature. The gods that surely exist, but remain hidden have the most beautiful bodies we can imagine. They appeared to the ancient Greeks in dreams. Contrary to this exists the surfeit of flesh we see on the obese, and in general the lassitude, the spiritual obesity, not only of modern life, but of many historical forms of life as well, the domestic life of the village sower, of the fetid valleys, of matriarchy and domestics, of slaves, the pollution of cities built on filth, the life of the swamp, the life of the human animal collapsed to mere life for the sake of life, as it devolves to the yeast form aesthetically, morally, intellectually, physically. On the other side is the life of the immortal gods who live in pure mountain air, and the sign of this life, where energy is marshaled to the production of higher order, is the aesthetic physique, the body in its glorious and divine beauty. What of the mind then? Well, as rare as beautiful bodies are, the mind in the same condition is even more rare. Let us strive, in our decrepit, cancerous and fetid world, for what is concrete and what we can try to attain. Those who forget the body, to pursue a perfect mind or perfect soul have no idea where to even start. Only physical beauty is the foundation for a true higher culture of the mind and spirit as well. Only sun and steel will show you the path. 16. Chimp in state of nature never jerks off, but in captivity he does. What does this mean? In state of nature he's too busy, to put plainly. He is concerned with mastering space. Solving problem of life in and under trees, mastering what tools he can use, mastering social relations in the jockeying for power and status. Deprived of this drive to development and self-increase, he devolves to pointless masturbation, in captivity, where he senses he is in own space, and therefore the futility of all his efforts and all his actions. The onanism of modern society is connected with its supposed hypersexualization and its infertility. It's not really hypersexualization, but the devolution of the spirit to the lassitude of a diffuse and weak sexuality. Life in own space becomes drained of energy through low-grade pointless titillation, and NoFap is a kind of cargo cult that tries to re-establish energy and order on path of ascent. Sometimes, however, it's a successful cargo cult, but whether it works or no can be seen usually within a week. The unfortunate thing about all this is that women have exceptionally good antennae for this kind of thing, and when a man frees himself from these pressures, they see this from very far away. They have an instinct to seek out ascending life and drain it. They and the species thereby achieve their goals, but you are bled dry and sometimes left a husk. They revert life back to its irritated state, and by their drainage of vital essence, they've laid low many great tasks. 17. I've always been attracted to filth and dirt because something in me knew intuitively that it is only in the underseam of life as it exists today that you find the real lacunae. The holes where its reach is limited or weak. I always sensed there was some real freedom in the blackest of red light districts among whores and junkies, perverts, and worse, with whom I've always chosen to take my dinners when I had the chance. I liked the stories they told me. Some showed letters from delusional Spanish engineer who wanted to marry her, Another told me story of miscarriage her friend had in old pervert's bathroom and how they flushed it down a toilet and then its name written on a piece of toilet paper. It's in this world and almost only in this world today that you can start to polish the claws nature gave you, assuming it gave you any. Unfortunately, it's easy for a man with good antennae to see that even this world of shadows has at most a conditional existence. The truth is that they are allowing these holes because they, or the people who crafted the fabric in which the masters of lies operate, are smart enough to know you need these free spaces. They are of great use to a manipulator. See how the Japanese, so famed for their love of law and order, have nevertheless always allowed the Yakuza to operate running prostitution and meth rings and even worse. Such things have a serious function in Japanese society, as the mafia and other institutions have had in Western society. Only a cretinous government will get rid of such a world entirely, and thankfully we have very stupid governments in the West now. Their days are numbered. It is with sadness that you realize, eventually, after the first exhilarating rush of freedom in this world of the damned, that these spaces too, though not so pervasively owned, have portals and gates manned by that which owns everything else. Still, it's better than nothing because in the moment all of that's still far away. On a late summer night when you are asked by corrupt lawyer to spy on Lebanese strip club owner and you're out in courtyard with 20-year-old prosty, she put cocaine on your tongue and you feel the ocean air at night fill you with the longing of the great sea. You might almost forget suffocating air of gravity outside and feel for a few minutes like animal before moment of hunt. 18. When speak of hormones you might think I'm a materialist reductionist or I'm saying you are like machine. This is attitude of many scientists or maybe just cultists of science. Actually many on the left claim to have this attitude, though they can never explain what moral force their rights and compassion have if it doesn't come from God or have some reality in human nature. When they say they are atheists, I never believe them. Atheists act like Stalin or Brezhnev, not like a Presbyterian schoolmarm. The truth is that these who make the core of the modern left are moral fanatics. There's not a drop of atheism or relativism in them. They don't enjoy the clear air of skepticism and never have. They always sneak into soul or free will when you're not looking. They actually get off on this and are acting out of spite, even spite against themselves. They want to feel they're not in control. My hormones made me do it. What is this you apart from your hormones, your genes, your inborn instinct, then? It's the genes, it's the environment, it's the economy or the oppression. All versions of the milieu theory and erotics theory according to Nietzsche. This is how they can also get themselves to believe in the transgender. These are people who believe that matter can somehow be corruptly configured and that we all have disembodied souls with male or female essences. The whole attempt to redefine identity, not just sexual identity, as a matter of decision, meaning decision made arbitrarily, freely, a choice of the intellect or reason, is their desperate reach to find a new justification for the freedom of the will, the soul unrestrained by nature or biology. Such things make no sense when you realize you're your body and there's no you aside from this. The first lines of the Iliad make this clear. You do have a soul of sorts apart from your body. It just isn't you. It's a shade. It's completely homosexual. 19. Some think this view absolves you of your responsibility for your acts. But actually you're responsible for much more than your acts. That which is said to constrain or determine you biologically is actually what you are. It does restrain your acts according to its inherent ways of desiring and acting, but you are this it and it decided to be, so actually you are responsible for much more, you're responsible for what you are. You are responsible for the good and bad things that happen to you, for any accident or disease you might experience. Actually it was all going to happen to you just the way it did at the moment of your birth or conception, and even before, at the moment your parents had a glint for each other in the eye. There is fundamentally no difference between you and that glint. 20. Animals walk around in a state of permanent religious intoxication. This is the natural condition of the mind and intellect, the moment-to-moment perception, of man as well. I heard some computer fool say that religion is the older virtual reality experience to justify his scam industry. No, the denuded state of the spirit and intellect, where you walk around demystified and disenchanted, is the virtual reality condition, and a terrible condition at that. For the longest period of which we are at present aware, for hundreds of thousands of years in the Paleolithic, humans walked around, like healthy animal, in a state that we would today call religious delirium, but which is in fact the default state of all conscious and semi-conscious life. For long after the coming of civilization also, many continued in this condition, or did so during special times of the year or festivals, where man could regain his free and natural state. It was civilization, and in particular agricultural civilization, that forbid this condition and plunged the majority of humans into a semi-permanent repressive or depressive frame. That this is consistent with, and even a prerequisite for, the impressive works and development of higher civilization and higher culture shouldn't be surprising. The majority of mankind suffered terribly also in their bodies from the coming of agriculture, the back-breaking labor, the malnourishment that shows itself in the smaller stature and more slender build of farmers' skeletons, of the destruction of their teeth, the atrophy of their brains and other organs. Agriculture allowed a steady food source, an increase in numbers, and above all the maintenance of an elite, free from these exactions, that lived parasitically on the many. But agriculture broke the human animal and domesticated him. Do you understand then, what the disenchanted worldview is? I have to laugh at the secular worldview, the disenchanted worldview, which is in fact the worldview, or mood of the broken peasant farmer. Science, supposedly the content, that's not even relevant here. 21. My favorite thing is to walk around the city during the day completely plastered, on very crowded streets, or on boardwalk by sea or river, with container maybe it looks like iced tea or water, but is full of alcohol. At night I don't enjoy as much, but during the day, to walk around in a state of great enthusiasm and energy powered by liquor, or, best of all, some kind of wine, that energizes you to a great and holy rage. I don't mean really rage, because I'm laughing on the inside, but I love to walk around like this, to see the people, to accost strangers in all kinds of ways, nothing is more entertaining. I've often wondered at these times what it would be like and how blessed life would be if I could feel this way all the time and not just when I drink and also never pay the price for it. Alcohol should never, by the way, be used for stress relief because after it crashes and even the next day there is a rise in cortisol so that unpleasant feelings become worse. But I wondered what it would be like to feel like this all the time and that there must be, or have been, people who do. Aren't we told this world is full of mutants? Why not a mutant who is perpetually full of this kind of euphoria, but even more, why not just one set of emotions, or one emotion? I've wondered at these times how life could be if you were possessed only by one specific feeling, and if there is a man who has only felt the purest and most intense anger, continually and nothing else, or who has felt only a very specific kind of joy and no other feeling. Even sadness of certain kinds makes life beautiful and can be a spur to great things. Even panic is better than the numbness promoted in our time. What would a creature who only ever felt such a thing be like, and why can't one exist? It would be a monster, or a god, or in any case he would be possessed by a god. 22. Do you imagine that men of genius, or, let's say, men of science and history walked around clear-headed, disenchanted, reasonable, with the tight-assed attitude of the science cultist and materialist? No great discovery has ever been made by the power of reason. Reason is a means of communicating, imperfectly, some discoveries to others, and in the case of the sciences, a method of trying to render this communication certain and precise. But no one ever made a discovery through syllogisms, through reason, through this makeshift form of transmission. Great mathematicians saw spatial relations, as great physicists saw, and to some extent felt physical relations. In contemplation of mathematical forms, there is almost a physical feel of geometric relations, and all mathematics at bottom, is about geometric relations, even when it doesn't seem so. Compare the Euclidean proof of the Pythagorean theorem, based on syllogism, which helps you understand nothing that's actually going on, with the imagistic proof of the three squares that makes you physically perceive even in your body, why this theorem is true. Gauss, so beloved even by the tedious scientistic goblins, that even Google gave him a cartoon, is famous to have said something like, "I got it. Now I have to get it." Meaning, he had seen and felt the fundamental spatial relation he was searching, but now he had to translate it into the imperfect language of mathematics for others. Thus all mathematics and all science in general. Mathematics is only the prototype and most precise of the sciences. It is about the definitions, not about the proof, not about the process or the algorithm. All great scientific discoveries, supposedly the great works of reason, are in fact the result of intuitions and sudden grasp of ideas. And all such sudden grasp and reaching is based on what, in other circumstances, would be called a kind of religious intoxication. It depends on a state of the mind, where the perceiving part of the intellect is absolutely focused, limpid, yet driven by the most relentless energy, an energy to penetrate. Direct perception is already intellectualized, and in fact much closer to the innate intelligence of things than cerebral syllogisms. No scientist worth anything has ever felt pride at using algorithms or trial and error to solve a problem. Yes, feminists are right that science is patriarchal in the sense that it is a rape of nature. Real scientists like Galois are monsters of will, and the preponderance of men in the hard sciences is explained by this orientation of character, as also by the fact that the minds of men more than of women are capable of sustained focus on one thing. Women are better at multitasking. There are women who were great scientists, but, like women who were great chess players or poets, they are probably spiritual lesbians. 23. The modern peasant just replaces the artificial prejudices of superstitions and village-old wives' tales with the superstitions of science, which he receives ready-made from authorities among the popularizers of science. He loves them because of the creature comforts he believes they provide through technology. He is a cargo cultist. He knows nothing of what goes into the discoveries of science, nor the way the substance is transmitted among scientists, he just has a propagandized image of some of the results. This is no different from belief in big magic, which is how many primitives think of science, the big magic of the white man. It's not even the substance of science that is the problem because it could be of great use, as much as any other popular religion has been. The problem is the frame of spirit that it puts the acolyte in. It makes him think he has power over the processes of nature which are at present actually very poorly understood. By removing primal fear, the only kind of awe that drives the many, it injects a toxic mix of complacency, arrogance, brutality, fanaticism that is all just under the surface, only so long as times are good. Science as popular religion brings no true consolation, but instead feeds a kind of false pride in spiting oneself. Does this sound familiar? It should sound familiar to women most of all. It actually makes the many more servile to the authorities who are presumed to understand and manipulate the technology. That is its purpose, to make the many submit, which wouldn't be bad if they weren't submitting to the lords of lies. You can see from all this anyway why enlightenment can never happen, but also why those critics of enlightenment like most of the followers of Heidegger go the wrong way. They are right when they say, in so many words, that the inborn character of every man is in some way unique, the biology too particular, much more so than the more uniform character of animals. For animals the worker ant or two fruit flies will have exactly the same inborn, but humans are all slightly different. From this they draw the conclusion that no common way can suffice for all, but that the only authentic way for you can come from the needs of your inner self. Every adherence to an external code, religion, or ideology is inauthentic and represents essentially a form of mind control. You're adopting the thoughts of another, inappropriate for your own metabolism, biology, peculiar conditions for growth or flourishing. Yes, it is true, Nietzsche went so far as to avoid reading anything written by others, so as not to infect his mind. And he was a mutant with a very particular biology, such types often are, and he was right that for them, physiology, diet, may be the most pressing research necessary. But he never forgot that the fundamental fact of nature is inequality, and this is something these people, the followers of Heidegger, and Heidegger himself to a great degree, all forget. It is madness to ask the common prefab run of man to fashion his own way, his own religion. The many find solace and meaning only in submission. It is good that this is so, and they shouldn't be made to feel ashamed for it. So much of the modern idiocy is based on shaming those who would find true pleasure in submission. The long chain of being is held together by command and obedience. The many are not so different from one another, nor their conditions of life so different. In the end you too, no matter how special or a genius you may be, are held together to the average man through many ties of biology, so that you would both do well to pay attention to what is common, especially insofar as the body is concerned. The body is not a private thing. The individual body is likely diseased. The universal body, the correct type discovered by ancient Greek science and art, is not something you will develop by nurturing your own individual quirks, doxies and faggotries. Biology works according to types and grades of manifestation, not according to the development of unique personal eccentricities. Science rightly understood helps us understand the types, the species, the true cleavages of nature. Science is not in and of itself the cause of our problems, of your alienation, nor does it have any content beyond who uses it and for what. Science is a great tool because it can uncover for us the biological conditions of all life and the relationships between types of life. It can, as Nietzsche predicted, settle the question of the true hierarchy of values, or more precisely, the real ladder of life, the true hierarchy of biological types. What prevents this from happening is not inherent to science or technology as such. It is a political and sociological problem. One way or another, in time, the right force will take hold of the power of science and reveal its true potential. Science was never meant to be for comfort. 24. I don't talk about if God exists, I don't know this. I've never had any feeling for this one way or another. I've sat in houses of religions, but I always felt nothing, it put me to sleep. Even the novelty of a Buddhist or Hindu temple wore off very fast. I enjoyed the spectacle but could tell, these priests are just more pile drifters. I was always so bored. How can the secret and hidden and precious things be about doctrine and just more talking? But, and I don't know why people put these things together, because for me they never had anything to do with each other. Even as a small boy I felt every object was inhabited by an uncanny shadow or spirit. I paid honor to certain toys and certain objects I found outside and hid carefully. No one ever taught me to do this. I found dead animal and buried it with ceremony. I always felt I could talk to animal and that they were my brothers and sisters. This animism is the natural religion of man and shows itself even to small child left alone to play. I remember fondly a small white dog under thickets of wisteria bushes growing on corrugated steel, and I believe this dog has followed me in different forms my whole life. But I'm almost sure that gods exist, and in any case, the argument against the one God isn't the same as against the other gods. In all the fulminations of Sam Harris and Hitchens and the new atheists, there's nothing really new. They want to banish not just religion from public life, but to enter your own mind and replace whatever vestiges of old organized religions are there with their own very stupid organized religion. If they have an easy time of it, this is because monotheism overreached. It made such grand claims, and when these claims were abandoned, it left people with the impression that there really is nothing besides science, which of course, nobody really understands, because it's nothing but a method. It would have been far more honest to embrace skepticism, but of course they would never let you take the logical conclusion. But still, forget for a moment all the claims made about God, about the creation of matter out of nothing, which runs against all intuition and all observation that you can make yourself. you don't even need science for that. Aglia said once that the real novelty of the one God was that he spoke the world into existence. How different this was from all other creation myths. All pagans knew the world was eternal and that its present condition was a result of cycles of birth, rebirth, regeneration, copulation. The Japanese even have myths about gods shitting on fields to make them fertile. How proper, it makes many other things about Japanese culture easier to understand. Monotheism, even of the intellectual or deist variety, and especially that variety, makes all kinds of claims too about the lawfulness of matter or of nature, about intelligent design and the like. It's actually much closer to the science that claims to disprove it than to the original paganism of all mankind. So much of this story makes time a line and makes matter conditional on a deity or creator that lives outside it. The creation of matter out of nothing, the creation of your soul out of nothing. Matter is dead, in some ways homogeneous, and its meaning is divine only in the sense that it reveals the creation of the external deity, or even better, just the laws he made to govern it. It seems and feels wrong, or runs against the immediate perception of the world, so it requires faith, a concept unknown to ancient pagans of all kinds. For this reason the Romans considered Christians and Jews to be no different from atheists. That view is very different. As such, there is no scientific reason why you would have to rule out the existence of beings stronger, superior, more intelligent, more magnificent than us, equipped with powers that appear magical to our understanding. The only reason I can think to dismiss this is Schopenhauer's, his amusing refutation of God, that any being of intelligence higher than man's would have already abolished itself long ago. But if you don't believe that, what reason can there be? Please no say there no proof I didn't see it. Scientific proof would be totally forbidden here. In fact there are many strange occurrences that have been recorded by many, as much as any event can be recorded, but this lacks any scientific meaning, it's a case of not applicable. If an impish deity of the lower kind, with which the world is full, some purple goblin with a wicked face showed itself to a pedant in a white coat, the scientist would convince himself he was hallucinating, and in any case, without being available for study, for testing, for experiments that can be seen by others. This standard has been abandoned for many fields lately. Its existence would not fall within the power of science at all. No, and what do you say to ancient accounts that such creatures showed themselves to men before, and maybe still do? Why would they show themselves to you? The weakness and spinelessness of modern man. No god would show himself to such creatures, to be jeered at. Why? Remember why the young men in Miss Hima's story of the League of the Divine Wind were so inflamed with passion and anger on behalf of the immortal gods. They knew that, without them, without the breed of warriors, the many would forget the gods. They would become powerless spirits hiding among the reeds, the subject of superstition, ridicule. The true gods have a kind of power, but not the kind the many imagine. Why should they care for mankind? They are rare and precious, and it is for man to find, acknowledge, and honor them. This, at least, was the ancient view. And the foundation and preservation of oracles was the first question of life and also of statecraft. Gods could not control nature or fate, but could reveal its workings at key times. If a god showed himself today to you, in a dream, would you have the inner energy and power to honor him and do his bidding in the world? Or would you, neutered by the modern pervasive hive mind of the slave, dismiss it and yourself as unreal or unworthy, when it is the modern bugman and his blabbering that lacks reality? But I want you to be intoxicated with the highest enthusiasm and ready to receive these greatest blessings with great confidence. 25. Nerds, so prized by the middlebrow clothmos who rule the cities and want to think that, well, at least they're smart and deserve respect, are people who possess a kind of self-destructive parity of intelligence. Their facility with pointless concepts and abstractions make them think they have an understanding of real things when all they have is a misunderstanding of words and grammar, overgeneralized to the point of meaninglessness. Simple people confuse a facility with words for real intellect. It would be very easy to speculate, for example, on the two forms of life I mentioned above and to say, as some do, that there is a progress in the universe from the simple to the more complex. This is similar to those who believe in historical progress and that there is a motion in history to greater reasonableness, or peace, or prosperity, or freedom, whatever. All of this way of thinking is wrong. While I believe the two physiological processes I mentioned do describe two different kinds of life and their differing conditions and aims, there is no evidence for any motion in time in favor of one or the other, either when we consider the universe or just human history. If anything, the evidence is motion toward the lower forms of life. I have no doubt anyway that beings of magnificent beauty and complexity existed before, but disappeared because the conditions for their preservation were that much more difficult. No doubt also that human civilization came and went in many cycles, over many hundreds of thousands of years. Civilizations far more advanced than ours are buried under miles of ash and rock, or under the ice of Antarctica, or were entirely pulverized. The memory of such things comes to very sensitive youths with a nervous system so strong that, as a parasite, it takes over the organism. In moments of limpid calm, a small perturbation in the will brings a faint feeling of a memory from long ago, they suddenly remember, like a revelation. 26. Reincarnation is the original belief of every society or tribe that drew its conclusions from observation of life and nature. The new religions, the faith of Israel and those that have come from it, and many others that came about at that time, or have arisen since. I believe Zoroastrianism is likely the root also of the faith in the Bible. It has some divine inspiration at their beginnings, but I believe at least the way they are interpreted now is a design of the human mind, and calculated. They are abstract, utilitarian, and crudely political. Before this nearly every society had a belief in reincarnation. This still has remained in some places, although the moral meaning imposed on reincarnation by Buddhism and Hinduism is, like Plato's, for reasons of social utility and is political. But there is much significance in the primitive belief in reincarnation, which is more like a primal and perennial belief. It is universal and naive, and I believe therefore it must have some truth. It's not possible to dismiss it as wish fulfillment and a false desire for immortality. First, because as we see, the later religions achieve this in a much better way with the teaching of the afterlife, but most of all, because to many people, reincarnation is a kind of hell. You've all had very comfortable lives, and maybe wouldn't mind reliving something like this again, but try to visit a burn ward. Life is so painful for so many that suicide, an escape from this infernal prison, is very common at all times. But, unfortunately for the suicides, that death is not the end of the story. I believe reincarnation is fundamentally true, even though most of these religions taught it in a metaphorical and popular form called metempsychosis. This is the belief that the soul, the supposed, but false, unity of will and intellect, is fully reborn. This is false. The intellect is a merely physical quality like muscular strength and can't be reborn any more than your muscles are literally reborn. You are not at bottom your intellect, this is impossible, although this is the assumption of almost all modern people even when they claim otherwise. They pay lip service to supremacy of the desires or to biological determinism, but they still believe they are their intellects, just imprisoned by flesh and matter and genes and a biological programming. This is wrong. And it's not the intellect that is reborn, I will tell you what is. Take a fruit fly or a worker ant. This type of being is very close to plant life in some ways. It has very primitive intellect, very primitive nervous system. There are inborn ways of behaving, of reacting to certain stimuli, inborn desires and orientations in the blood, and when you kill one ant, the next one over will be identical in this regard. Its rebirth is instantaneous because the ant has a will that is shared uniformly across its type in the hive and is therefore persistent and enduring. Once the queen dies, the next queen is indistinguishable from it in that thing that Schopenhauer calls the will. What he says is inborn way of wanting and is in a very literal sense a reincarnation of this same thing. If you don't see this, it's because you keep confusing yourself for your intellect. But that part of you that is really you persists even when your intellect is asleep and would persist even if you experience total amnesia. If you doubt, just ask yourself. Someone you love, if you had to choose, would you rather they forgot everything but still behaved the way you always knew they did, or would you rather that they kept all their memories and knowledge but had a radical change in personality? This question is easy to answer. If you love someone only for what they know or remember, everyone knows this is a betrayal because that's not who you are. And in fact, there's no such thing as a radical change in personality. The lower forms of life are nearly uniform in their wills or inborn ways of acting, and also very simple. In the case of amoeba, yeast, and such, they are not far removed from the behavior of the natural forces, like gravity, which is completely uniform and persistent. Once dead, they are immediately reborn and indeed live simultaneously in numerous bodies. For higher and more differentiated animals, the will appears more particularly defined for each type, species, and finally each specimen when it comes to the human. But this biological reality, independent of what is known, remembered, or consciously decided, is a matter of the blood and body, and this same being, thing, or will, call it what you will be reborn in just the same way. In a different time, but this same particular way of desiring and behaving that is inside you will come again. This is the real meaning of reincarnation. And with the glut of humans in our time, we have to wonder if the same being also lives now in multiple bodies sometimes. Where do these beings come from? Some have said that these new billions of humans, that in a previous life they must have been yeast, amoeba, locusts and other insects that are born in multitudes in each season. I'd like this to be true, but I think rather that in previous ages, mankind also swelled to many billions or even more. And also I have no doubt the entire universe is teeming with life of all kinds. 27. It would be interesting to know what the extinction event or path is in each previous human cycle of civilization. If it is something completely random and external, like asteroids or volcanoes, or if it is something inherent to civilization as such. Some circumstance or behavior that leads to virulent disease, or some kind of great weapon, or maybe even something more uncanny. I wonder if the peoples and religions that exist now also existed in past cycles under different names with slightly different superficial circumstances and appearances, but in all fundamental ways otherwise the same. And if one or a set of these, or some new belief that hasn't even appeared yet, as the cause of the end of civilization in every cycle. A frog once suggested to me that the explosion of African populations in our time is the event that the movie Alien describes, a population bred under the most extreme pathogenic load, and that, despite its weaknesses in cold weather, can nevertheless wreak so much damage on the rest of the world that societies collapse under the march of the zombie. I personally doubt this. Asia will shut them out without glancing twice or hearing of their suffering. I think instead the end in previous cycles has varied, but that very often, and most interesting, one cause has been the emergence of brotherhoods of savage men who have decided to purify the earth and rid it of the infestation of the human cockroach. Because unfortunately in the long run the development of civilization and comfort leads to the proliferation of damaged life, the innovation of mankind leads to unspeakable abortions of life, and men on the periphery who want to preserve the natural order begin to plot the end of everything. I also wonder if some ancient civilization has managed to escape all these cycles of destruction and has hidden underground somewhere. Maybe they are really eternal and live life as an experiment, detached, seeing it as a playful dream they can observe at a distance. Maybe an emissary surfaces from time to time, so they can amuse themselves. I shudder to think, though, that by this same reasoning the aborted robot life to which the mass of mankind inevitably degenerates in each cycle of civilization also survived, maybe in small communities of moles, inside dry hills of limestone, or not far underground in old networks of caves and tunnels. No doubt stories of vampires, kobold, cryptid humanoids and many others might refer to these degenerated stragglers that prey on us and terrorize us. No doubt many among the ranks of deities have come from both types, and stranger things still exist under the earth. Please see D-Rose if interested. There are more things. 28. There can be no artificial intelligence in the way that people really mean it. If they mean some machine that approximates the intellect of man, this may be possible and even very useful, although they're very far from their goals at the moment. Success at chess is their one great achievement, but they fail still at kicking a ball, pouring ketchup, recognizing simple objects. Could one hunt or survive being hunted? But they never mean just the intellect in this way, or a crude approximation of it. When people speak of artificial intelligence, what they always mean is artificial life, a robot of some kind, or an artificial consciousness indistinguishable from human consciousness. There is an apparently different, but in fact similar speculation that nerds love. That the universe is logic or information. That what constitutes matter can in fact be recorded as information, as relations of logic, and that therefore the universe must be precisely this. This is behind also the belief that you can upload your intelligence to a computer and attain immortality, and many related forms of imbecility. The motivation for this is nerdishness, and also somewhat the Jewish way of thinking, or the Judaizing tendency that promotes facility with words and number, but approaches mental deficiency and even retardation when it comes to anything visual. The Jewish hatred of matter, an ancient prejudice that precedes the Bible, and the hatred also for beauty that they share with other Semitic peoples, and many others besides, all of this comes together to promote this kind of aggressive nerdishness. This is the origin of many of these claims, though it shouldn't be imagined that here or elsewhere I am referring to all Jews, or that this absolves non-Jews. Because the Judaizing tendency I talk about is inherent to human nature, and is very common also among non-Jews, and in some degree it exists within everyone, together with the counteracting love of vibrant matter, image, and beauty. It just exists in different degrees in different people and peoples. In any case, all of these delusions that you can be uploaded because your brain can be uploaded, that the universe is information, or that something like artificial intelligence actually can exist, are all at bottom the same delusion and the same power fantasy of the nerd. The nerd can be described as a person of inelegant and pedantic intelligence, often middling intelligence, who takes excessive pride in the intellect, even in the memorization of facts, the design of clumsy concepts to which reality is then expected to fit like to bed of Procrusts, and he identifies with it. There are very rare people in history, even a few saints and martyrs, who were ashamed of their evil character and will, and sought salvation in contemplation, sought some escape in this. These are sometimes noble people, but this doesn't describe the nerd. The nerd doesn't hate himself, his nature, his tendencies or spirit, nor is his intellect powerful enough to overawe his needling will and consider things without the pressure of interest or the gravity of petty desires. He never sees things like the true genius or the artist does, when the perceiving part of the intellect becomes so powerful that it really overpowers everything else. So that the fullness of the object occupies all of consciousness and an idea, or some new insight into the world, is actually grasped. No, the nerd is a creature of will, under the direction of a petty will in the everyday sense, and all of his thoughts, concepts, and designs have a forced quality, because they refer always to need and desire for some kind of gain. This very often is just material gain, but the desire for prestige is even worse. In men of intellect the desire for prestige is often the most disgusting, especially when there's no native manliness, because this leads to cowardice and lies, to others and oneself. For this reason Nietzsche said manliness is the first requirement of the philosopher, but there's no one farther from the philosopher than the unmanly nerd, and there's no enemy more implacable of the human race, and of the genius of the species, than just this nerd, and everything he represents. The attempt to mimic life through algorithms, through the brute force of trial and error, will never create either life or consciousness. Just what would such a machine be conscious of, but just that, a mimicry or parody of the middling human intellect. A mirror and exaltation of the false intellect of the nerd that never leaves the stream of words, syllogisms, motives and desire that is always forced and contrived because it's under pressure of some petty need. And it's really grotesque. It's as if you have a girl you desire, she dies but using big magic you reanimate her corpse, put makeup on her, reteach this zombie to speak, force her to copy all of her old habits, condition her like you would a pigeon, to act in ways you remember and that you liked. But in the end she's just a reanimated live-action doll, and this is grotesque. This is just what AI is. It is a fantasy of power of the conspiracy of biological interests that unites the nerds, the intellect of reason. The party that believes in empty words, the middling, and the Jews of the human spirit into hoping for their golem. AI is the golem of those who hate life. It is their true messiah and their vengeance. 29. Youth and beauty are universally hated in almost all human societies in history. These societies are run by decrepit, sclerotic old men. Sometimes they use image of fat woman, Earth Mother to beat the young men over the head with and make them submit. Other times they promote ugliness in all ways. Ugliness and perversity in custom, scarification, circumcision, self-mutilation. Customs and religious authorities that concern themselves with how you should wipe your ass, brush teeth, how many fingers to insert in anus to achieve such and such magical medical goal, petty legalisms of all kinds. The Shiite sect among Muslims and rabbinical Judaism are most like this. All of this smothers genuine religious enthusiasm and the true oracular science, from which can evolve arts of great beauty. Often their food is unappetizing and looks like boiled rocks. Their languages, most human languages, are so hard to listen to. Tagalog is almost torture to hear, though I don't mean to single out this culture, it's hardly the worst in terms of love of ugliness. Actually, the Filipinos can be a pleasant people with an impish sense of humor, inherited from the long-lost Negritos now absorbed in their population. Their people are ugly. Millennia of arranged marriages, for financial gain, among the Indians, originally a noble people, led to a nation now, of 1 billion, that almost never wins any athletic contests, that has won fewer gold medals since its inception than tiny Croatia has since 1992, where both the men and the women are inbred, ugly, unsexy, and almost deformed. I don't mean to pick on them, because they're hardly the only ones, and this ugliness, physical ugliness, is almost universal in the human race. Beauty is the very rare and precious preserve of tribes that have striven to promote child-making for something other than financial, social and political gain. No, the promotion of ugliness is nearly universal, and the love of beauty is so rare. Among the great civilizations, only the ancient Greeks, the French, the Japanese, and somewhat the Italians are true lovers of beauty and refinement, and have based their existence exclusively on the promotion of beauty. How many times in history have cultures become ugly and petty because financial interest overrode eugenics in marriage, and free love, though not perfect, is somewhat more eugenic than letting fathers trade daughters for personal gain. In their hatred and distrust of beauty, one feels such societies live under a tremendous pressure of needs. Their true ruler is the god of gravity, and they are dominated by fears of the future, unspeakable anxieties about money and matter, and importune, brutish behaviors all motivated by need, by the desire to grasp, by the feeling they all nourish, that they're being taken advantage of. They always feel they're being disrespected. The desire for respect is the true mark of the forever slighted. The distrust of beauty is sometimes sold as the high-minded rejection of material desire by the saintly, or the kind or the contemplative. But that's just nonsense, and you can see it in this way. Beauty-hating cultures have one other peculiarity they all share, which is very revealing. They hate also privacy and personal space, they hate also beauty and good and refined manners. These societies are based on such popular solidarity that it's considered normal to barge in on other people, Absurd to demand to knock. They make animal sounds when eating. Or, the way such people are often said to smell in history, whenever such societies are encountered. All of this tells you what the hatred of beauty is really about. Freud refers to the inner pain many of his clients experience trying to shift from this kind of medieval, collective, smothering culture of ugliness to one where personal space and distance, refinement and beauty were instead valued. It's about the hatred of distinction or superiority, hatred of the principle of difference and distance between individuals that is by contrast so prized in those very few beauty-loving cultures. And the hatred of superiority comes from the suspicion the many in such beauty-hating societies feel that, in not being subject to the horrible pressures of need and anxiety under which they themselves live, that the beautiful and carefree make a mockery of what they take most seriously. The beautiful threaten to unravel the regimentation under which they must subject their constant crude need for things. This is why such societies descend to the lowest types of faggotry whenever their native laws are even slightly relaxed. Islam is most like this. Jews, when devoid of their religion, as well as Persians who live under the tyranny of Shiite law, and most of all the people of the Gulf states, all revert to a crude animal condition without their rigid laws and become completely dissolute, as the Arabs were said to have been before Islam. And they will soon return to this. I don't need to add notes for spurgs and pedants. Men like John Milius are accepted from such judgments, but their existence has nothing to do one way or another with my point here, which is about general types and the ways these generate. I am speaking of two opposing views of life that are based in two very different needs of two very different biological orientations. There can be no compromise between those who live under the pressure of need and of material increase, who are the walking shadows of the dead, and on the other side, those who are carefree, joyous, pleasure-loving and worship beauty. One seeks the preservation and expansion of mere life, the other seeks the exaltation of life. 30. Among the Greeks the man of power was called Aner, who was different from the other word used, anthropos, which referred just to some shadow being, indistinct, some kind of humanoid shape. The real man was rare, and most males were not and are not real men. The word in beginning was used only for demigods and superhumans like Achilles or Diomedes or Odysseus. In the Iliad, Diomedes in his moment of glory is compared to lion whose spirit has been aroused by anger at wound and scatters the shepherds and dogs before him. Athena kindled a fire on his head and shoulders and marked him as one possessed by the true inner force inside all things. This burst out of him now and made itself light up above all others. The real man was a man filled by courage and daring that all came from an excess of being. This idea was shared also by other Aryan cultures, the Roman Ver, the Sanskrit and Avestan Nar, the Welsh Nur, the Proto-Indo-European Nur, all ultimately refer to a kind of vital life force capable of superhuman strength. There is other word, related, having to do with manly youth. Au. Au refers to the youthful life force that renews itself in each generation, that moves from life to life without end, forever persisting. It is behind all the Indo-European words for youth and youthful strength and power. It appears in Latin iuinus, in Sanskrit, and all the Germanic and English forms. But most of all it is this same word, this same idea that is behind the Latin etas and eternus, behind the vision of an age, a cyclical age, of eternity. How pregnant in meaning that youth and eternity are the same word and idea in these languages. The Gothic and Germanic words are the same. This idea very vivid in Greek. In this the words ie, meaning forever, and the word aeon, both contain at their root this meaning. Of lifespan, life force, youthful strength. These people saw the vigor of youth as the true driving force behind life and behind all things, forever renewing itself, reincarnating itself anew in each generation in full force, though the memories of men and of societies may disappear. If you want the most beautiful poetic expression of this view, you must see in the Iliad when Homer describes the death of Euphorbus. His death is compared to young tree in its prime blown down by strong wind. Pythagoras, looking on Euphorbus's shield in Sicily, broke into tears, remembering that he had been this man. He knew of what was hidden on the other side of the shield. This view persists. And this is why someone like D.H. Lawrence could look on the sarcophagi of the ancient Tuscans and see in this pleasure and beauty-loving people a celebration of something very similar. They put on their funerary objects images of reveling and feasting and abundant flourishing life and great joy, wine parties, leaping dolphins, to remind themselves that this irrepressible force, nature, youth continues anew in each generation and is never defeated by death. In same way when I post physiques of beautiful and handsome youths I do so, because in contemplating them, I am filled with a deep calm and joy. I see in them the persistent rejuvenation of this same eternal force that is inside all things. I see in this force the hidden design and intention of nature, its reaching beyond itself. Its designs are unspeakable, and what it reaches and wants is mysterious to us, can only be understood imperfectly and through metaphor. Its plan and design is beyond human comprehension, but it is without doubt that it is striving, against numerous other factions and centrifugal forces, for the production and creation of a superior creature of some kind, a specimen of terrible beauty and power. I have no doubt that the gods, if they exist, would look only like perfected and improved versions of beautiful physiques of young men, just like they showed themselves to the Greek oracles in dreams. They were the first to discover the true biological and physical form of the man, the correct form, the true proportions. I have no doubt also that this force, in being inside us together with others, has made human history, life, and our own minds the battleground and stage of its action, and that passivity in the face of its power is therefore absurd. It calls on us to allow ourselves to be possessed by it and to wage war on its behalf against its enemies. If you want to understand the true power of Aeon, of the eternal youthful energy that is the universe, you must study what remains from Heraclitus when he uses this word and how he connects it to the idea of fire that is the essence of all things and all action. And he is very right when he says, the best desire one thing above all, ever-flowing eternal fame among mortals. But the many glut themselves like cattle. This is what I believe in.